Good morning. Thank you for joining. My apologies, I couldn't make it on time to be physically with you today, so I will intervene online. I want to welcome you. I'm MEP Saskia Bricmont. I'm delighted to host this meeting about EU-Africa partnership and the Global Gateway. Thanks for joining the meeting, and I will make a few introductory remarks before to give over to the Secretary General of the Commission and to hear about our very interesting panel and guests today. So on the 17th and 18th of February 2022, European and African leaders met and agreed on a joint vision for a renewed partnership. And the aim of the partnership are solidarity, security, peace, sustainable and sustained economic development, and prosperity for the citizens of two unions today and in the future, bringing together people, regions, and organizations. And we thought from the EU side that everything was back on the good track and that our privileged relation was and will be stronger than ever. Yet, the week after, the war in Ukraine broke out. And on the 2nd of March, it was a shock for Europeans that the UN resolution condemning Russia's aggression did not get the backing of 25 African countries, accounting for half of the African population. It did not stop there, since Putin's disinformation campaign, putting the blame of food insecurity on EU sanctions, has been successful in pitting many African countries against Europe. Global Gateway and the 150 billion euros investment package decided during the summit of February 2022 are essential to assuage tensions and to show that Africans and Europeans can trust and support each other again. After the EU inaudible message on the TRIPS waiver, Europeans are to talk the talk with Global Gateway. However, some questions remain open. It is nor fresh nor pure EU money. The plan will rest on a significant leverage factor. So how to attract private sectors without privatizing sectors that are key sectors for the achievement of the SDGs, like healthcare, education, energy. Also, to what extent will the additionality principle be respected? According to this principle, the financial bonanza should come on top of the official development aids and not replace it. Approximately 10% of the NDICI funding will be dedicated to digital actions to enhance the digital connectivity and lower the digital divide, in particular in under-deserved regions, countries, and populations. This is very good, but at the same time, we should not forget that digital economy has huge implications for the mining sector, and there are growing concerns that mining will spread into sensitive forests landscapes, contributing to deforestation and forest degradation. Therefore, how to ensure consistency with the upcoming European deforestation regulation. Also, the Global Gateway clearly puts the focus on the exploitation of hydrogen energy from developing countries for export to the EU. But no indication has been given on the use of green hydrogen to answer to the major issue of energy poverty in developing countries, while in sub-Saharan Africa, 600 million people have no access to electricity. It is doubtful that this trend is a sustainable solution for the continent, in particular for water-stressed areas. 4 out of 5 African countries are unlikely to have sustainably managed water resources by 2030. It remains unclear for the from the communication on the Global Gateway whether the projects identified will benefit from a similar scrutiny process as the one required according to the NDICI Global Europe regulation. I would like to stress on the role of the civil society here. Yes, they were consulted prior to the multi-annual and regional indicative programs, but to what extent their input was taken into account in the final version of the programs. On the one side of African countries, we know that many governments are reluctant to involve civil society that they perceive as too intrusive. The 150 billion euros investment package is generous, but will remain on the bank account of the EU and potential investors if at the same time we don't provide technical assistance and operational tools to improve capacity building and fight against corruption in the beneficiary countries. The absorption capacity issue also implies that coherence has been found between partner countries, between their needs and demands on the one side, and investments foreseen by the EU on the other side, which was a core message also from the European Parliament's report on the future trade relations between the EU and Africa. We are really honored by the presence of two representatives of the European Commission, and therefore I would expect from you that by the end of this session, you would answer what may be the most important and pragmatic question in light of the policy coherence for development. How can the Global Gateway, the EPAS and the GSP interact to foster the SDG and for the positive fallout to be felt by each African? And I cannot conclude this foreword on the eve of the 8th of March without mentioning that policy coherence also commands that the Global Gateway has to contribute to women empowerment, accordingly to the Gender Action Plan 3 and the Scholz report adopted in our house. I will stop here and give the floor to Manuel Barrios Pietro, Secretary General of COMECE. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Saskia Rickmund, for this introduction. So, dear friends, on behalf of the religious and faith-based organizations involved in the preparation of today's event, and I will briefly say who they are. So it's EUCOR, the European Christian Organization for Relief and Development, the Baha'i International Community, AEFJN, the Africa-Europe Faith and Justice Network, Don Bosco International, ACT Alliance, Action by Churches Together, CITSE, Caritas Europa, World Vision, and also COMECE, of which I am the Secretary General. So on behalf of these organizations involved in the preparation of today's event, I would like to thank our host in the European Parliament, MEP Saskia Brickmund and MEP Carlos Sorinho, for providing a space for dialogue and exchange of perspectives on this important issue, which is of shared concern to us: how to make the Africa-EU partnership a partnership of equals, and in particular, how the recently launched EU Global Gateway Initiative can better contribute to this objective. At the 6th AU-EU Africa Union and European Union Summit, held almost exactly a year ago in Brussels, the political leaders of the two regions announced an Africa-Europe investment package worth 150 billion euros that should be delivered through the Global Gateway. The EU's new connectivity strategy aiming at creating smart, sustainable, and secure links and promoting investments in areas such as green and digital transition, energy, transport, as well as education and health. This initiative is supposed to mark yet another step in the EU's recent efforts to move away from a donor-recipient relationship towards the model of fair partnership of equals. Why is this a topic of concern? And why is this so for religious and faith-based organizations represented here today? Churches and faith-based actors are deeply rooted in local communities. They share and live the values of trust, human dignity, human rights, and sustainable development. Values that should also underpin the Global Gateway if it is to become a positive offer to the EU's partner countries. In preparation for today's event, we held a series of dialogues among European and African faith communities and the broader civil society to discuss how, acknowledging the legacy of historical power imbalances and injustices, Europe and Africa could cooperate on an equal footing for the benefit of their people, reaching even to the ones often left behind. In one of our latest exchanges, looking in particular at the EU's increased reliance on the private sector, this was mentioned before by MEP Saskia, in the relations with Africa, several representatives of local communities asked pertinent questions regarding the governance structure of the Global Gateway. Its main objectives is transparency, as well as the space given to partner countries and civil society in shaping the investment priorities and their implementation. Against this background, we would like today's discussion to help bring us a step forward. Our objective is to have an open, frank, and constructive conversation that brings together different perspectives and helps us to address together, as policymakers, religious and faith-based actors, as well as broader civil society from Europe and Africa, the question that the Global Gateway sooner or later will have to deal with. For example, will it promote a connectivity of competition or a connectivity of care and community? Will it prioritize business interests at the expense of human rights and environmental protection? Or will it duly reflect local communities' needs and promote an economy that serves the people and the planet? Which production, consumption, and development models will it support? One of the key insights that our previous exchanges was the need for a fundamental change to more just, inclusive, and sustainable economic, trade, and local food systems. Such change also requires shifting from an industrial and extractive model towards a more local, just, and sustainable one, grounded on agroecology. A model that enables Africa's small-scale farmers to become vibrant and sovereign actors of a food system that is resilient to climate changes and other global instabilities, such as the recent food crisis brought about by the war in Ukraine. We want to invite today panelists and participants of our meeting to explore and reimagine the Global Gateway, so it may contribute to this shift of perspective by being coherent with the objectives of locally led sustainable human development and providing a genuine contribution to a partnership of equals between Africa and Europe. I thank you very much for your attention, for joining us today, and I look forward to a conversation, to a discussion today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Father Manuel, for setting the scene so well for us. Dear parliamentarians, panelists, participants, press, again, let me, on behalf of the organizers, thank you very much for making this possible. I'd also like particularly to thank our panelists. I'd like to thank you. I will introduce you because we have quite a few people online. I think it's best if I run through the people. So I'll introduce you now already. Chiara Adamo, who is the acting director at DG INPA G and head of Unit G1, which deals with governance, democracy, and human rights. Lucy Espilia, who's the Characterised Advocacy Officer in Africa, based in Kenya, but with us here today. Thank you very much. Claire Ameyo Quenum of the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa, AFSA, based in Togo and joining us virtually. You are very welcome. Ivano Casella, the Trade Affairs Officer at DG Trade Unit C1, African, Caribbean, and Pacific overseas countries and territories, who is also joining virtually. And finally, Masaidio Kalenga Kimanya Ngeo Foundation for Science and Education in Uganda, also joining us virtually. Just a few words on logistics, if I may. There's French interpretation for online participants. To enable the work of the interpreters, and I say this as much to myself as to others, may I ask the speakers not to speak too quickly, please? And online participants, if you have technical problems regarding the interpretation in particular, then please alert us in the chat. We have someone available to help you out. Finally, I will be addressing individually tailored questions to the panelists. I'll do this in 2 rounds. For the first round, panelists, you will have 5 minutes each to respond. In the second round, it's 3 minutes. Our timings are quite tight and we've started a bit late, so I'm going to be strict and I will alert you when you have 1 minute left. I'm not quite sure how I'll do that online, but maybe you can help me with that. Then after the 2 rounds from the panel, Saskia, you will have the chance to add comments based on what you've heard. So no pressure on you there at all. And then after that, we will have a round of questions and answers. And what I'm going to ask the online participants to do, because you can, is to put your questions in the chat as we go along during the presentations, during the talks. And specify, if you can, who your question is addressed to. And then for the sake of fairness, I'll make sure that people in the room also get the chance to put their questions. And so with that, Chiara, if I can move on to you. Are you ready? Yeah. So the question that we have, that we would like to put is, how far does the global gateway, announced as a geopolitical strategy to be implemented through a Team Europe approach, how far does it contribute to forging a partnership of equals with Africa? How far does it influence the way the NDICI Global Europe is programmed and the choice of implementing partners and modalities?
Thank you and good morning, and thank you very much to the MEPs for hosting this important opportunity for a conversation with all of you. I sense that in the question answer I will answer a lot about what Global Gateway is not. So I'll focus the presentation in what Global Gateway actually is or is meant to be. So Global Gateway is a strategic framework. It's the European Union strategic framework towards partners, indeed to forge partnership of equal everywhere, including in Africa, of course, which is a big priority for us, and harness the green and digital transition. It responds to geopolitical consideration, as you mentioned, that is true. In a world which is really increasingly complex and competitive. At the same time, it was conceived even before the 1 year of war and aggression of Russia against Ukraine. It really comes about from the poly crisis and the increasingly global challenges we are all facing in the world. I call the 4 Cs, to make it short, that you know all: the COVID, the climate, the conflicts, and the cost of living. And in such a context, we all realize that the Agenda 2030 and the SDGs were and are put to a test, and it will never be possible to actually achieve those goals if we only utilize ODA. So it's really about additionality. It's really about making sure that we also leverage the investments that can come from IFI, from private sectors. And it's also about a new way of working better together, having more impact to achieve results in a world which really must not leave anyone behind. So in this context, the strategy is a strategy offer towards sustainable investments. But when we speak about investments, is not just hard infrastructure, and that is what makes us actually, or our offer, different from other offers. It's also an offer on soft infrastructure in human capitals and skill, and very importantly, it's a value-based offer. So it's really about the enabling environment that surrounds it. if you look at the communication on Global Gateway, you find the key principles of the strategy, and they are grounded on democratic principles, including participation, transparency, and of course human rights. The human rights-based approach to international partnerships applies to all we do, of course, branded Global Gateway or whatever else you brand. So how does it work? What is the philosophy behind? The philosophy behind is really that we need to increase the strategic resilience of our partners alongside our own strategic autonomy and resilience. And in order to do that, indeed, as I said, it's mobilizing resources, but it's very much mobilized partnerships, including novel partnerships, build bridges, create actually strategic autonomy. For Africa and with Africa, if you look at the priority areas that were decided at the summit and we are now implementing, I can give you a couple of quick examples. And one example which is really close to my attention because it's also human development example is health. So we have in the health sector a big flagship which is called Math Plus. It is about it's a Team Europe initiative to promote strategic autonomy of African partners to be able to produce vaccine and medicines in Africans for Africa. With the pandemic, it became clear that 94% of all medicines and 99% of all vaccines in Africa were imported from elsewhere. This is really a fragility, and the continent stood up and said, we want to produce up to 60% of vaccine by ourselves by 2040. And that really matched also, of course, our interest in partnering with them. The pandemic is for me the easy illustration of the fact that we are not an island, that everything has consequence everywhere. So the safety and the health of our partners in Africa is also our safety and our health. How do we do that? It's not for the EU to replace private sector, but it's about making sure that we ease healthy business, healthy private sector to invest in Africa by de-risking the investments and by all means by working with our partners at the regional level and at the country level to strengthen regulatory frameworks. So what we did there, for instance, is making sure that we bring the experience of the European Medicine Agency in the building up of the Africa Medicine Agency. So it's promoting knowledge and transfer of technology. For instance, the WHO Transfer Technology Hub in South Africa that was done through our Team Europe support. I had to cut it short.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, we're loving this.
And I'll talk about food then later. Just maybe one word also to reply to the first interventions about the budget. I mean, when we talk about the EU part of the Global Gateway strategy budget, it comes from NDCI, from Global Europe Regulation, and it is submitted to all the principles and obligations that pertain to that, including the spending targets, where we committed to spend a minimum of 20% on human development, social inclusion, 30 and plus percent on climate change, etc., etc. Of course, it also brings in the FSD plus innovative financing. It brings in the resources of our member states, and indeed what we are doing together, making sure that the development effectiveness principle of country ownership is respected. So all the consultations which are done throughout the programming cycle involve our partners in governments, but also very much civil society and the other stakeholders at the local level. And concerning participation of civil society, I have few data here. Inputs from delegation found that 100 out of 103 delegations consulted with civil society for the programs, and civil society are involved in consultation on Team Europe initiative, either as part of broader programming discussion or through dedicated dialogues. However, we are, of course, very, very ready to listen and to see how we can improve, get feedback from country examples, etc. Funding of CSO is also very much there. In the first 2 years of the Global Europe, we committed already 3 billion euros to global civil society actors, and I continue.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I have this brilliant timer on my phone, which I forgot to get going, so you may have got a little extra time. So, Lucy, I am going to move on to you, but thank you so much for that exposition, and we look forward to more conversation. Lucy, I'm going to move on to you, if I may, with this question: how does the economic model promoted by the Global Gateway fit with local realities and initiatives? Why is it important that the Gateway puts local communities' needs, knowledge, interests, aspirations, and vision of development at the forefront?
Thank you, Flores. Good morning. It's really good to be here. It's really cold, trying to just coming from a place which is really hot. And yes, so I first want to really appreciate the presentation by Father Manuel, who's the General Secretary of Commerce, who was emphasized on the need for locally led sustainable development, and also just to flag some of the important things that Shara has mentioned right now on the focus of the Global Gateway, investments towards infrastructure. And if we think about right now, even discussions that happened during COP28 on the need for us to move towards a just transition, and I can see the Global Gateway is looking at issues to do with energy and how to do the transition as maybe investing towards renewables, and also some important issues like ensuring that as we intervene and as we work with partner countries, as the EU works with the partner countries, countries are not pushed to debt distress, and also emphasis on the principles of governance, democracy, and equal partnerships, which is positive in terms of the economic model that's promoted by the Global Gateway. But there's a need for us to also continue to question ourselves on how do we ensure that these future strategies actually contribute to poverty eradication, pay attention to the needs of the local community, so that policy decisions that are passed at the international level also translate to concrete actions at the local level. And so I will just point on two things, because the question is why is it important that the local communities, their needs, their knowledge and aspirations are put into consideration in the vision and development at the forefront. And so I'll look at two things. One is the glaring issue of trade imbalance, because Africa has this external dependency. We are importing 85% of our food. And the paradox is we are endowed with natural resources. And where the natural resources are is where we have political instability. It is where we get to see a lot of poverty. And so how do we ensure that where the resources are, they are working toward tangible benefits for the local community? I saw last year in 2022, the African Union said that Africa must industrialize. So how do we move towards this? Because we want local communities to access these procurement opportunities when they are farming or when they are producing any of these things in small-scale production. How are they empowered to access these opportunities? And so how do we also address issues of distortion of local markets? For example, if we are importing so much, what happens to the local produce? In one area, there's a group of people who are producing enough for people to eat, but there's a problem with supply chains. In the east and the Horn of Africa, if you go there right now, very sad situation where people are facing effects of climate change because of drought. And then there's a group of people complaining because we are producing tomatoes, we are producing rice, but nobody is buying. So how do we address these issues to do with trade imbalance? And not just benefiting the political class or the multinational corporations, it's about the local communities, because that's where I feel most policies should target. How do the local communities benefit from this? And also, if we are discussing infrastructure, I see the Global Gateway is looking at investments towards that. We now have the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, and it should not benefit a particular segment of the society. Infrastructure should facilitate free movement of goods, services for people. It's about facilitating mobility for these things to reach there. And then the second thing that I will touch on, just going back to what Father Manuel talked about, the locally led sustainable development, and the need for us to reflect on how the extent to which the private sector, which will be the focus over here, and how does it contribute to poverty alleviation. So where we have the private sector coming into African countries and doing their investments, how does it look at the needs of the local communities in terms of the environment? Are we generating inequalities when people are being paid very high wages, but the local communities are going home with 150 USD? So how do we look at improving their well-being when we look at the private sector itself? So we hope the Global Gateway will look at these aspects for economic diversification for the benefit of the local communities and reduce the external dependency. And we hope that the hope of African leaders to allocate at least 5 to 10% of their budgets towards industrialization, that this can actually be realized so that we boost local production. Thank you, Doris.
Wow. I say that as timekeeper as well as a listener. Thank you. Right, we are now going to move on to another speaker from civil society, Claire Amio Quenum of the Alliance for Food Sovereignty in Africa, who is joining us virtually. And we always hope and pray that this works well. Claire, the question to you is how to make sure that the Africa investment package of the Global Gateway isn't detrimental to human rights and the environment, but on the contrary, supports locally led and sustainable development and food sovereignty in Africa.
Thank you for giving me the floor. Greetings to all the people around the table. We think that the partnership should work so that we can develop human capital. And this should respect human rights as such and take people to the center of the development programs. This means that we need to meet people, let's say, concerns. When I see the proposal of the partnership, it is based on education, infrastructure, and health. And we find that they should be built up on people's real needs for education, infrastructure, and health. When I take food, the food issue, food and the right to food is in the center of human rights. And if we can have a partnership that allows people to produce their food, to eat their food, and also to have transactions on the food products, this will help the communities to develop. But most of the time, we found that companies can come, advocate for some crops, and bring monoculture in the communities, and this endangers people's food sovereignty because the crops that were asked to produce do not meet the people's food needs to be sovereign in food and also to have food security. And this is important for us that there will be a stress on education issues so that to develop people's skills in the communities based on their needs, and also they can make a decision when there are transactions to even in agriculture, they can have the skills to discuss with the partners and say what they need and find also what the partners need. And when we take health, health is linked to food. When you have the right to food, you can be in a good health. And there is a need to work on the health issue for the quality of the health services. Especially, I will stress on maternal health services. And also when we are thinking about infrastructure, the roads and the schools, the water schemes must help people to, when the producers, the farmers, they have their crops, these infrastructures can help them to bring those crops to the places people have to consume those products. So food is linked to health, food is linked to education, and infrastructure should help to meet those goals and needs. This is what I can just contribute to for the time being. Thank you.
Round for you to put your camera on because we'd love to see you if bandwidth permits. And I'd like to add that for all of the participants if possible. We are now going to move on to Ivano Kazelia. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, from DG Trade. And Ivano, the question that we have to you is how can we reconcile the objectives of supporting regional integration, value chains and markets, as well as local added value transformation and industrialization, which is a priority of the African Union, with the objectives of the Global Gateway as a political strategy, competing with other big players, and supporting the EU's interest in accessing raw materials and commodities. Over to you, Ivano.
Thank you, dear all. I hope you can hear me, and I've also branched my camera and you can see me. It's always good, and I regret of not being able to be with you today. But nonetheless, this is a very interesting debate, and DG Trade can also bring its added value to it. We have heard that the Global Gateway is essentially a geopolitical initiative. It's a game changer of extremely high importance, reflects a vehicle for democratic values, high standards, as well as good governance and transparency, and aims at boosting smart, clean, and secure links in digital, transport, energy, and climate sectors. But it combines investment in art infrastructure with the enabling environment, regulatory frameworks, norms, and standards. This enabling environment is also needed to render our trade policy with Africa more effective. And this is what we have put into our trade policy communication of 2021. There is, in fact, a direct link between these objectives promoted by the Global Gateway and our economic partnerships agreement in sub-Saharan Africa. In fact, we have seen that, and we have empiric data that has shown that these economic partnership agreements also contributed to the increased trade and investment in comparison to those who haven't decided yet to join us in these type of agreements. Since trade agreement concluded with these African countries offer predictability and legal stability for business, which is what the Global Gateway is also about. The implementation of its Global Gateway project, some degree of priority, we think, should also be given to those countries with whom we have negotiated these type of agreements, as they contribute to economic governance on the ground, and partner countries should be privileged in benefiting from these funding initiatives. These trade agreements promote development of common values, supply chains, and diversification of trade. Again, we have data that has shown that. In fact, the regional approach taken by EPAs can contribute, we think, to encouraging more trade between African partners, including through the development of regional value chains and the EU support for industrialization. Likewise, and this was mentioned by our previous interlocutor, EU support through the African Continental FTA is also conducive to promote African regional value chains. We think that economic integration can reduce the cost of trade, improve the availability of goods and services, raise standards, and increase consumer purchasing power. In fact, these trade agreements reduce the import duties on many of these intermediate goods and make it easier for African industry to diversify and add more value to their product. Cheaper, high technology imports from the EU can also boost services industries, especially in knowledge-intensive sectors that are crucial for upgrading the value chain, promoting technological transfer between the parties to the EPAs. Moreover, when we assess value chains in Africa in economic, environmental, and social terms, we think it could help to promote their sustainability, inclusiveness, and resilience. This would be particularly relevant in case of agriculture value chains. And these value chains, to conclude on these points, have the potential for promoting regional integration by increasing the demand for intra-regional trade in agriculture products and enhancing responsible and sustainable investment in agriculture and agribusiness. So to sum it up, on supporting regional integration and strengthening local value chains, we believe the Global Gate will be implemented, ensuring consistency with our trade policy and actually leveraging it. And this is what we are trying to do with new initiative, notably what we have called Sustainable Investment Facilitation Agreements. These sectoral priorities promoted by Global Gateway can allow local development and link to global value chains by creating hard and soft infrastructure, allowing for energy and digital transitioning, strengthening logistics, ports, logistical centers being constructed, and so on, and by focusing on education and research. There is a huge demand in Africa for infrastructure in partner countries, and speed at which other players, notably China, had responded, and in so doing gained control of strategic value chains, should be noted. However, many are questioning this offer. In this competitive global environment where it is a lot about geopolitics, Europe is making an alternative and a better offer, we believe, to partner countries based on equality and based on our values. And we think there is scope for a massive improvement in that regard. This should address green and digital transition in partner countries, with helping also Europe in the need to support diversification and reduce dependencies. And finally, let me say that on raw materials, as was part of your questions, the Global Gateway project will look also particularly on energy and raw materials. Some will be in the 2023 list of projects, which will be available soon, and more will come as a result of our own Critical Raw Material Act that we are going to publish soon. So, to finalize my intervention, I would say that this is how we reconcile the objective promoted by the Global Gateway and our trade policy, whose primary target is to stimulate trade diversification, attract investment, create opportunities for the development of new regional value chains in the continent. I'll stop here. Thanks.
Now, I know how to say your name, Masadio, because we practiced, didn't we? From the Kimani Ngeo Foundation for Science and Education in Uganda. Masadio, we have for you this question. How does civil society in Africa perceive a new EU initiative such as the Global Gateway? What do people and communities know and expect from the Africa-EU partnership and from an EU's investment package for Africa? And Masadio, I'm going to ask you whether you can see me, because the only way for me to signal the minute is by waving. Okay, good. I'll wave at you when you have 1 minute left. Over to you.
Thank you very much. It's a privilege really to have an opportunity, to interact with spaces like this one. And you've pronounced my name correctly, Masadio. I'm in Uganda, but I'm originally from the Democratic Republic of Congo. I'm sure many of you know what's happening in my country right now.
We're having a hard time hearing you. Is it possible to move a little closer to the mic?
Oh my goodness. Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's better. It's already better. It's already better.
Okay. So I was saying that I'm originally from the Democratic Republic of Congo, but I live in Uganda, and you are aware of what is happening in Congo, and it's really so touching. It's alarming. So, nevertheless, it's always a very big, I would say, privilege to participate, to interact in spaces like, this one. And I always say that, the diversity of the people, represented in this space, is a proof that really humanity, that we are one global village. So I'm representing Kimanyangeo Foundation for Science and Education. It's a Baha'i-inspired organization. And so our organization really is inspired by the principles of the Baha'i faith. And when I read, I opened the Global Gateway website, somewhere I read that, I'm paraphrasing, it says that together we can build a more prosperous, more peaceful, and sustainable future for all. I was so really impressed with that because it resonated with our beliefs as Baha'is and what we are trying to do in the communities. And we believe that all men, again I'm quoting from the Baha'i writings, that all men have been created to carry forward ever advancing civilization. Not only one segment of humanity, not only one continent, not only one race. It's not only Europe, it's not only America, it's not only Asia, but all humanity, have been created, to carry forward an ever advancing civilization. And when we look at that, then the burden shouldn't be put just on the shoulders of one nation. It shouldn't only be Europe or America or Asia to think about how to solve the problems that humanity is facing. But it should be everyone. Everyone is concerned. And even the burden to feed the world, because I'm a farmer, I enjoy, farming, should not only be left, for rural people only, because some people think that questions about food and what it's, people from the farmers, people from the rural communities to think about. Every human being really has the potential to contribute meaningfully to the building of a better world. Those are some of the principles that really govern the activities that we do. And I hope the Global Gateway, if you find that there is some insights from this, of course, you're welcome to pick some. But I think you may also agree with me that it calls for changing the way we have been doing things in the past. Because we have had, like, if you come to Uganda right now, we have a lot of NGOs. If you go in the village, like where we operate, you'll find hundreds of NGOs which are there from Europe, from America, from all over the world. But we ask ourselves, why is it that up to date, we are still poor? We are still crying. Where is the problem? Where is the problem really? For instance, let's ask ourselves if our relationships really are built on justice, on trust, on sincerity, honesty, all these qualities that sometimes we think that they are just in the church. Yeah, the church is supposed to be concerned of such qualities like justice, love, but really these are the principles that we should always ask ourselves if whatever dealings that we are doing are built on these principles. Because there is no doubt that many development projects really, and as I said before, we are seeing that they don't really lead to very meaningful change, where they are operating. Or if there is some change that we see, we'll see that it's just a small segment of the population that becomes so rich and at the expense of others, especially people from rural communities, from rural areas. So how do we help people really to become protagonists of their own development, that rather than recipients of development projects. But how do we help people really to become protagonists of their own development? I would give you one example. It's a famous example that you will find. They were telling us that there was this NGO that came, I don't know from where. I won't cite the continent, but they saw that these ladies, women, were going to fetch water from a long distance. And for them, they thought that, okay, we need to build boreholes where these ladies, to ease their movement. So they built for them boreholes. But to their surprise, they found that these ladies still continued going kilometers away, miles away to fetch water. They would leave the borehole there and continue going miles away to fetch water. Later on, they realized that no, these beautiful ladies, actually, that was not their challenge. Their challenge was something else, but because they were not involved in trying to understand their challenges, their situations, this project just came from outside and they thought that this is the best solution for these ladies, and they put it there, but they never utilized it. Really, we have to think of building, our relationships on these principles of justice, equity, love, trust, and I'm sure Global Gateway will benefit a lot. Thank you very much. I've done.
Right, we're back on here. Masadio, I thank you very much for your intervention. You didn't see me waving. I'm afraid we went quite seriously over. So for the next time, I'm going to ask you just to keep an eye on the screen, if I may. Sorry for that. Reprimand, if you will. But thank you for your intervention. I'm going to go back. I'm looking a little bit at our time. We're actually 15 minutes over time. We can make up some of that in Q&A, but we're going to do the second round now, where there are 3 minutes to each of you. So I'm sorry for that pressure. And we're going to start with you again, Claire, if I may. And if you can put your camera on, that would be wonderful. The question to you, Claire, is how to transform the global gateway economic model into opportunities for small-scale farmers, and in particular for women, in respect of food production, local value chains and markets. What are the preconditions and examples of good practice? 3 minutes for you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for giving me the floor. I think there is a concern to include the participation of civil society and church actors, so that the real needs of the people can be considered to go through this new partnership. Because including civil society and church actors, we have the more opportunity to work with the women in the grassroots communities. And these women are people who know more about the development of the communities and the countries in Africa. And these women need to be empowered. There is a need to empower them, give them more skills, and give them some equipment so that they can process in a right way the work they have been doing in the communities. And this should not go overhead of the people, but people should be consulted, and people should be their voices should be heard, and also there must be some human, technical, financial, and material resources, so that they can improve the way they are doing the things, and also improve the way they think about the development. And this should be included in the negotiation and the program building with the two parties. Thank
you. Claire, thank you. We heard most of what you had to say, but you fell away a bit, and I hope that we'll look into the possibility of perhaps also circulating your talking points after this meeting. I'm going to move back to you, Ivano, with a question, which is, how will you ensure that the Global Gateway and the EPA support African producers, small-scale farmers and entrepreneurs who work inside territorial and regional markets and value chains? So building on, I think, what you spoke to earlier.
Thank you. This is a very fair question that deserves to be put forward. EPAs are drivers for strengthening competitiveness and promoting industrialization in Africa. And this is also the case for local entrepreneurs who need specific support. In fact, EPAs have been designed to support partner countries in the production of value-added goods and to develop their industrial capacities. They sustain these countries' effort to develop new industries and diversify their economies, to make them less dependent on unprocessed commodities and low value-added craft industries, which generate less revenues. EPAs also promote liberalization within African region and provide for flexible rules, like the rules of origin, for instance, that encourage value chain, and I explained that earlier on. Furthermore, long-term free access into the EU increases incentives to invest in developing competitiveness and build capacity to meet our standards here in Europe. EPAs, therefore, can help to attract both domestic and foreign investment to manufacturing sectors and help break the dependence on commodities and low value-added craft industries. But EPAs also lower the cost of imported inputs and products needed to make final products, such as machinery, for instance. This also lowers the cost of production in African partner countries, which in turn increases the competitiveness of the local economy to produce for local, regional, and international markets and to connect to the global value chains I also referred earlier on. All these benefits that accrue essentially to small entrepreneurs do not happen in a legal vacuum. In fact, if local industries is threatened because of import surges from the EU, EPAs makes it possible for African countries to protect certain established industries or the so-called infant industries that a country seeks to develop. There is also agriculture safeguards that can be triggered. African countries have also been able to keep their markets closed to imports of sensitive products from the EU that are especially keen to foreign competition. And this includes doing so to protect government revenue. So all in all, EPA partners can also take measures to protect food security, and this goes in direct advantage of local entrepreneurs. So I'll stop here because I think I gave you the gist of the answer. Thank you.
I think we're muted from, there we are. Thank you very much indeed, Ivano. Lucy, it's your turn. Can you tell us how the Global Gateway could be reoriented and its governance be restructured to better fit with people's aspirations, needs, and rights? It's a leading question.
Okay, you know, when we are discussing policies, there's always the tendency to stick to the old and familiar. And so maybe we need to also think the people impacted by policy decisions, how are they, do they have a seat at the table? Because they will help us to flag our blind spots and enrich the policy implementation process. And then I have had very interesting intervention by Ivano Casello on the empirical evidence that shows how the economic partnership agreements, they enhance trade. And maybe what we also need to do is to embrace policy dialogue and see if there's anything that we could be missing out on, especially on the impact of this on the regional economic communities and Africa's quest for regional economic integration. How do we continue dialogue with civil society, with research coming from academia, so that we continue to, with our journey towards the partnership of equals. And then another thing, maybe within the governance structure, is to also look at issues of conflict of interest. They are common within the the business environment and governance structures, maybe within different parties, maybe to look at that and also address issues to do with power relations, especially if one person has more money than the other, who has agency. How do we ensure that we are genuinely working towards addressing conflict of interest? And also, lastly, very interesting to hear about the European Union Raw Materials Act. And so let's work together with civil society so that they can continue to preach this message, so that we can raise awareness on some of these policies and ensure that different actors, as they negotiate and participate in these processes, they are also aware of very interesting policies such as this, and also having a monitoring and evaluation mechanism just to see where are we and did we make a difference? Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed. I should, by the way, extend apologies from MEP Sorinho, who had to step out, but will be back. Masadio, the question for you is how to restore confidence in the Africa-EU partnership and make sure that people don't feel excluded and disenfranchised. 3 minutes, and please look at your screen in case I'm waiting. Thank you.
I say that really humanity is one. We say that we are flowers of one garden. And I think the COVID-19 pandemic taught us a lot. You know, first I remember in Uganda here, we thought that when we heard of the pandemic in China, we thought that that was no Chinese is no problem. Like right now, some people might think that the war, you know, between Russia and Ukraine, it's their problem. But we saw that that's problem which started in in China, eventually it affected the whole world, the whole humanity. The same with the war in Ukraine, you know, I mean, between Ukraine and Russia, we are all feeling, you know, the pain. So we have got to make sure that we come to the realization that we are one. Europe, Africa, we have to know that we are one, by the way. You see, and that's why when I hear about the global gateway initiatives, I get excited. I'm like, okay, this is something that if, again, we go back to the principles that I talked about of justice, we look at each other in the eyes and we say that with sincerity, with trust, and we say that actually we can come together and work for the betterment of the world. I'm sure there is a lot that we are going to achieve. And by the way, we shouldn't forget also the role of the rural communities in bringing about change in this world, in the society. Because many times you find that all these development projects, they focus much on, cities, towns, but we forget that we have also these rural people who also have a lot to contribute to the well-being of humanity. It shouldn't be really about enriching a few individuals and forget actually the mass of the communities, which actually they are the majority. So I don't know if I've somehow answered the question. Yeah. Thank you very much. I hope I'm clear.
The importance of democracy and of locally led development, etc. The question is, how do you respond to civil society concerns? How will you ensure that the way the Global Gateway and the Team Europe initiatives and the EFSD Plus are managed and governed will contribute to democratic ownership and locally led development pathways in African countries?
Thank you. Now, as I said in the first intervention, indeed the democratic principles are anchored, embedded in the strategy. It's also what makes the strategy and this offer different. So we really need to walk the talk, and this means selecting investments which are sustainable. sustainable for local people, local communities, local environment, and economies. So I made the first example around health. We talked a lot about food, and we all know the challenging situation that in particular Africa has been facing, and it's incredible that Africa cannot feed itself with all the resources that it has. So we invested, of course, a lot in through humanitarian assistance and really addressing food insecurity. But I think really importantly, through this global strategy, global gateway strategy, the focus must be and is on food production. So making it long-term, resilient, and sustainable solution. So think in Senegal, 1/3 of the mangoes produced there go to waste because they don't have the fridge capacities. So there we do partner work on green agriculture, decent jobs. Think the cocoa initiative in Cote d'Ivoire or Ghana, where we really look at sustainable agroecological way of doing things, of way of operating which respects decent job, which really is addressing local economies, local community needs, and I think that's really the direction. And I think the civil society plays a crucial role to keep us firm in that direction and to produce oversight in how this is done. Concerning FSD Plus, also to appeal some of the concerns, the way it works, of course. It works also through legal contractual obligations and clauses. The MEP in her initial intervention mentioned that tomorrow is the 8th of March, gender equality needs to be promoted and consistently so. We issued last year our open call for the windows under FSD Plus. Gender equality, women empowerment, promoting that gap 3, which is our agenda for gender equality, was one of the requirements for submitting proposals. So this really needs to be totally integrated in the way we do things. Finally, for civil society, what I'm pleased to tell you, and Lucy, you made an excellent point, is that civil society are going to be full part of the Global Gateway governance. And the Commissioner Pilan has recently endorsed our proposal. Actually, we discussed it last week to create a Global Gateway Civil Society dialogue platform, to have a dedicated working space to civil society at large, but also local authorities to really dialogue. And we want to use these both ways, meaning we would like to keep the dialogue going and civil society informed and contributing, but we would also like, the international organizations, Brussels-based, etc., to be the eyes and ears and also give us the feedback from the ground, and at the same time maybe also dissipate some of the question marks that civil society, NGO, etc., in partner countries may have. So I hope this will also enable, the conversation to keep going. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed. Saskia, the word is to you. If you would like to add any comments after having heard the various panelists.
Yes, thank you very quickly. Thank you very much for those different interventions. Very interesting. And I can tell there is a global convergence between the different speakers, and even listening to the European Commission, I hear the necessity that the Global Gateway contributes to alleviating poverty, including local communities, and enhance development with special focuses on education, on health, on empowering local producers and local and regional markets. I think the planetary issue of global climate deregulation has also been addressed, and that this needs to be taken into account, including when it comes to private investments. And I think maybe there's more to be discussed on the way that those private investments benefiting from the Global Gateway possibilities can also be oriented towards local communities and the fight against climate change. I also heard the role and the links between the Global Gateway and the economic partnerships, for instance. But there, I think if the aim might be the same and the principles are shared, nevertheless, the way investments are thought and the way economic partnerships are defined might focus on different interests. And I also know, because you mentioned it, it has been mentioned, the question of the rules of origin, for instance, are quite controversial because the EU has a different approach than some partner countries in Africa. And I think there, we should be, as lawmaker, also from a European Parliament perspective, with the Commission, be pushed to maybe rethink the definitions that we have and the objectives that we have through our economic partnerships. I'm not sure so far they really contribute to regional integration, even if I hear that this is a shared objective. I think it has to be thoroughly assessed through impact assessments, for instance, that all these objectives mentioned today and that I fully support are being met. And I will end my intervention by saying that our friend Masaidio mentioned that we are part of a global village, and that is true. And for a village, in order to function properly, it needs services, it needs education and easy access to education and solidarity. And I would say that the challenges are the same because our villages here in Europe are progressively emptied from their services, from solidarity actions, from schools that are closing. And I think there too, we should, as you said, think as a global village and how to enhance investment in services, in public services, in order to serve the population.
Thank you so much. We are now at the point of Q&As. I've seen one question from the room already. I've seen two questions from, I see three, I see four. Will anyone give me 5, 6? All right. I'm going to start with the hands I saw first, and also I'm going to ask you, Louisa, have we got questions from online?
One. Yeah.
One question online. Okay. So I think to make it fair, we're going to start with Vince. I saw your hand first, then we're going to go online, and then we will work around. So Vince, may we have your question, and please also to whom you're addressing.
Thanks. I'm Vince Chadwick. I'm a journalist with DevX. My question is
Oh, hang on. Wait, let's put you on the speaker here.
Yeah.
You'll be back.
My question is to the colleague from the Commission. The flagship projects for 2023 were approved by member states last week. I tweeted them. I guess they're going to be announced soon. One thing that's striking is these are projects that development banks actually have had in the pipeline for years. And so I think it's a cautionary tale to all of us here about the Global Gateway and deciding what we're going to do. The Global Gateway, above all, is a label for things that the European Commission was already doing and the EIB was already doing, and this takes years and years to prepare these projects, and if they fall in the current budget cycle, then tant mieux. But I think it's a misnomer if we sit around talking about how we're going to monitor these initiatives. The EIB has a civil society monitoring mechanism. Investment officers at AFD are in Cote d'Ivoire today trying to find projects. There are existing mechanisms and things. That's a general comment I'd make, and a frustration, I think, when we talk about, just because the Commission has announced a new name for something doesn't mean that what fits in that bucket is actually new. My question, after that rant to get off my chest, is about the flagship projects. There are 87. 3 of those are on education. One of them is vocational training, which is being implemented by Total, a fossil fuel company in Mozambique, which is training people in fossil fuel pipeline building techniques. And that's listed as an education deliverable under the flagships for Global Gateway in 2023. So my question is, and that's led some in civil society and analysts to say, do health and education fit within the Global Gateway structure? the DG of INPO was in Luxembourg last week at a public panel saying we need to go back into hard infrastructure. Again, that's not your unit's job. Part of the frustration I think some of us have in Brussels is everything is now global gateway, but should health and education be global gateway? What does a profit-making project look like for a development bank in education? Because in health we often talk about the vaccine example. These are questions that people have, and when we look at the proof in the pudding, it's Total, a company that made $36 billion last year, doing vocational training on how to build gas pipelines. So that's a concern. And for the colleague quickly from trade, the Global Gateway communication talks about a European Export Credit Agency and exploring that idea. I understand that the feasibility study is now being completed on that idea and that a proposal could be coming in April. Would be interested to know more about that. And I'm interested to know from DG Trade why we need a European Export Credit Agency when we have so many national European Export Credit Agencies. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'm going to take the question as well, if I may, from the... Oh, here it is, right? It's from Fanny from SEPS to Chiara and Ivano as well, I'm afraid, so you're not off the hook. What is the EU strategy to include local civil society into the implementation of upcoming corporate sustainability due diligence directive? And how do you link this to global gateway projects? So I'll remind you of that one in a second. I think let's take those two questions first, or three questions, in fact. There was the question around the flagship projects to Chiara.
Yes.
Yeah, the subtleties around subtleties, but so the points around education, health.
Yes. Okay, no, thanks for the question. Is our education and health a part of the global gateway strategy? I mean, when you look and read the communication of 2021, was it December? These are two key pillars of global gateway strategy. How this translates in practical realities, examples, etc. We talked about health. This is maybe an easier example in the sense that you have a hard infrastructure component. You will have the biotech container. You will have, facilities, medical facilities, etc. rebuilt. You have the soft infrastructure, which is around the regulatory framework, but also very much the skills that are needed for making all this vaccine medicine production sustainable over time. So, research center, but also investment on universities. So there the link also with education, making sure that, we are not building things that are standalone, but as was done maybe in past decades or by others, but we keep it sustained. So that's for health. For education, I'm not sure about your example, but I mean, we have different components in education. Of course, when you talk about TVET, the vocational training, this is very directly linked to sustainable investments. Because of course, I mean, what we need to do is making sure that African youth because we are talking about Africa today, is prepared to harness the transition, to really perform the jobs of tomorrow. Notably, our agenda is to promote the Green Deal, also, digital and green transition. But for that, you need certain specialization. So, of course, I mean, helping and working through also people-to-people connection, university-to-university connection, research, and making sure this expertise is growing is in mutual interest. When we talk about education at large, we launched these regional initiatives on teachers training in Africa very recently, in South Africa, and that would aim at making sure that we look at reforming supporting countries to reform the governance for teachers, so decent salaries, but also making sure that they have the foundational skills to be able really to ensure quality of education and learning. And there is also there a component on green and digital skills. Basic education in the end is, educating young people today will make all of this sustainable in 10, 20 years. So there is a link. Now, it is much more direct if you look at, the TVET, but I would say, education in the broad sense is the foundational basis for every other pillar this strategy wants to pursue. We will not be able to have green hydrogen in Namibia if we don't start, with green education now. And human development, actually, as I mentioned, is one of the spending targets in the NDCI, as you know very well. It's at least 20%. Our commissioner priority is to make sure that we go from 7% on education to 10% and possibly 13%. So I don't think that we should see these agendas as in competition. I don't think it's helpful. We should actually very much push for bringing this all together in a very concrete, integrated way. Due diligence directive, I hope that the legislator really do it and achieve the results quickly, because if you want my opinion, I mean, this is a principal avenue to make sure indeed that our EU companies, EU business do abide to the standards we want them to perform. And I hope there will be a spillover effect also for the rest of the business internationally.
Chiara, thank you. I think that was a tough question. I think, the numbers that we've heard are concerning. We recognize that this is a new label, if you will, the Global Gateway. Perhaps a new approach as well, but that we're looking at all projects, but we'll be concerned to look to the future to see how these numbers start improving, I think is possibly one comment to make. The question, there was a question, Ivano, to you, which was on the European Export Credit Agency.
Yeah. So by ensuring better coordination among European export credit agencies, the EU should also ensure more effective use of financing tool to develop projects on the ground. And that's why we are pushing for that. And all export credit agencies are subject to OECD guidelines, which oblige them to finance sustainable projects from a social and environmental point of view. So this is more of a guarantee, if you want, that project that will be selected will have a greater impact on the ground. This is for that question. I would like, just if you give me 1 sec to come back on the criticism with regard to rules of origin. Of course, rules of origin has always been a very delicate file, and over the years we have tried to make sure that the benefits of the trade preferences that we have given to African countries accrue to the African producers and not to third parties that would simply use their establishment in Africa to export at the most favorable conditions through the EU. But let me tell you that the difficulty and what we are trying to address here is the necessity to harmonize these rules. And this is exactly what we are thinking about in terms of creating a platform that would allow us to use the different rules and protocols that we have negotiated throughout these trade agreements, and to find a baseline on which we could harmonize them and therefore prevent this dumping that is effectively happening on the ground. And in doing so, we are also very much inspired in the rules of origin protocol of the African Continental Free Trade Area. So we are just, trying to get inspired and trying to stick as much as possible to what the African nations have themselves negotiated to make sure that what we do will not create additional loopholes or additional difficulties for companies on the ground, and benefits especially the African companies. And this is just a point that I wanted to make. Thanks.
There was the remaining around corporate sustainability due diligence directive and how to include local civil society into its implementation. Is that something which you feel in a position to be able to speak two.
Oh, I mean,
And I'm going to ask you, Ivan, we've got 8 quick minutes roughly for questions still before we need to hand over to MEP Sorinho. There you are. Thank you. I'm going to stop intervening too much, so I'll hand
I'll be super brief. Just to say that, of course, civil society. I know that my colleagues that are dealing with that instrument have already organized civil society consultation. This may not be perfect. What I know as well is that there have been a massive interest from African countries themselves about how these autonomous instruments will be implemented on the ground, and will they be creating additional obstacles to their exports towards the EU. And that is something that also has to be thought through. Nonetheless, of course, we recognize the absolute merit of these instruments, as was said by my colleague from DG INPA, on trying to have a spillover effect on the ground. But this is a wish that we hope it will have. But at the same time, we have to pay attention to that. And in doing so, we are consulting massively. That's a fact.
Online as well. We're going to take the questions that we saw first here in the room. Rachel and our colleague from ECDPM. I'm sorry, I don't know. San, okay, great. And can I ask you to be brief in how you phrase it?
So, yeah, Rachel, I am from the Baha'i International Community. I just wanted to maybe highlight that because this is also a faith-based sort of space, and because among us, we've been really thinking, so what does it make this sort of space different than any kind of other technical space? And so I will take the liberty to ask a bit more sort of conceptual questions and sort of even philosophical ones. And I think that's what is really the added value also of this particular conversation. And one question that we've been asking ourselves in the preparatory meetings, and we constantly meet, is really what is the sort of conceptual framework also through which we operate, through which the European Union operates, that sort of almost neoclassical, capitalist economic framework through which a lot of our actions and thinking are carried out. What are its limitations? We know to what extent it's brought humanity forward, but we also see its limitations. And I think they've become so apparent, whether it's with COVID, with the war. And so we just wanted to also see what the room is to really have these deeper conversations and to start thinking, the things we've done so far, can we actually revisit them to some extent? Have they worked? Or are we sort of replicating certain things that we think work, but may not work? And also to come out a bit of this, civil societies on one hand, policies on the other. It's really a joint sort of learning process that we would like to see happen. Everyone is, in the same boat. So how can we have that joint learning and this space that allow for certain conversations?
And that question presumably is to, everyone, but San?
Yes, San Bilal from ECDPM. My question is the Global Gateway simply the new name for European development endeavor and trade and development? Because this is really what you have been talking about. Without Global Gateway, we would have had the same kind of discussions probably under NDK and Global Europe implementation and EFSD Plus implementation, or the APA implementation. Or is there also a geostrategic dimension to it? And if so, what does that mean in practice to have a more geostrategic dimension? And I would like to ask that, of course, to Chiara and Ivano, but also perhaps to Lucy, if you have perspectives on what would that mean for Europe to be more geostrategic in a partnership with Africa?
In the interest of time and still the questions that we have, all of which are fantastic, here's the question around, is there a space to discuss the conceptual framework to look at what we've learned from the past and maybe going back, in my opinion, back to the 70s and what worked then and what didn't, what we learned and where we are now. But yeah, space for a conceptual framework. And the question on the geopolitical aspects and dimension of the gateway. Chiara, would you like to go first, or shall I ask Lucy to go first on her views? Please, well, let's go to you first.
So I'll be very brief and point out we are in a situation where resources are scarce and everybody is trying to make ends meet. The EU has its vision to try and generate resources through business, through investments in Africa. And African communities are also wondering at what point will we graduate, grow up, be industrialized, move from this rudimentary manufacturing sector. But we cannot do this if we do not address the inequality. So a geostrategic, the geostrategic dimension that would work for Africa would be, let's go back to the basics, facilitate free movement. And let me talk about one simple thing. If the EU is able to trade within Africa, is Africa able to trade within the EU? Are we able to meet the conditions, or are there any tariff and non-tariff barriers that come in between? And then if it's geostrategic, maybe literally speaking, sister continents, are we able to move freely? Issues to do with visa inequality, that we have to apply for a visa and have something stamped on our passports, or the pages go fill up and it's not easy to get a new passport, but you get visa on arrival. So how do we address this glaring inequality so that we're able to facilitate free movement of goods, services, and persons? If it is about education, is it easy for us to get education opportunities here without being labeled as migrants are coming to threaten our economic security? So let us address these glaring inequalities that happen in between Africa and Europe, and yeah, it will work well. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Chiara?
Yes, thanks. Is Global Gateway, does it say equal to international partnership overall or development cooperation overall? Is that the question?
Just a label was part of it.
I think it's a strategic framework which has a component of geopolitics in it. I'll come to that. But not only, as I mentioned in the beginning, it's also the realization that we need to build more sustainable, resilient, strategic autonomy of our partners alongside ourselves. External, I mean, the fact that we put global gateway strategy on the table does not mean that we are stopping to deliver on what is more traditional work that actually we have been doing, will be doing, which is, for instance, what we discuss with this in terms of, I don't know, budget support to make sure that, there are education reforms and kids do not go out of school in basic schooling, that we do peace and security support, that we do what my unit does from day in, day out, human rights protection, democracy support, etc., etc. I mean, so I think what we should, and I know it's a temptation, but we should refrain from looking at this strategy as in competition with our overarching goal in international partnership, which is and remain curbing inequalities, making sure that we go back to Agenda 2030, etc. So I really think we need to bring it together, and we honor our gateway also because it's a new strategy. It's not really much known, and it is important to also make it known, make sure that it is understood. But my directorate, we have peace and security, we have human rights, social protection. These are enabling. If you can call them enabling policies for investment. I mean, you cannot do investments if you don't have a rule of law. But it's broader than global gateway. What is geostrategic and what is strategic about it? I'm not sure how many times we have to go into this, but maybe I mean our president is more eloquent than I am, but it's really about realizing that we are probably so, you know. And certainly so, she defines it as the strategy, as a template for how Europe can build more resilient connections with the world. And of course, this is geostrategic in a moment where there is geopolitical competition, where you have China and Russia who are there, but they have been there for long, and I must say the results you know, I'm not sure that this really has encouraged decent work. I'm not sure that, but there is a big temptation to just go in that direction. So yes, we are.
Why is a loan from China bad and a loan from the EIB is good? I don't understand.
I'm going to have
because China.
It's yeah. I mean, you know, it sounds like there's a lot of room still for more questions and more discussions, and I'm really sorry to interrupt you at that point, but I do need to give the floor to Carlos.
We want to continue this very interesting debate. Maybe this last one. What makes the difference between the European Union and values and China is because our contenders, our support are values embedded and different values. But okay. So thank you very much, dear panelists, dear guests, dear colleagues. Thank you very much for the interesting session that the various speakers have given us this morning. My wish is to send during all the event, but as you know, this week is the week before the plenary in Strasbourg, and the groups meet to define the agenda. I need to go to make some physical interventions in the groups to try to put some issues in the agenda next week in Strasbourg. As ACP Parliamentary Assembly co-president and also as recently appointed standing rapporteur on humanitarian health at the European Parliament, it is very important for me, it was if possible to hear more, but to have the perception from those working on the ground, from civil society, from NGOs, about the weaknesses, the gaps, the fears, the needs that are linked with the different problems of the European Union. My metric, I always told that, different metrics, and you have a lot of metrics, but my metric is people, and it's for them that I will always fight in the context of Africa-EU partnerships of equals, and also the partnership of equals with the ACP. The Africa-EU partnership of equals is now based in 5 pillars, as you know, put forward by the European Union: green transition and energy access, digital transformation, sustainable growth and jobs, peace and governance, and migration and mobility. It has to be the basis for enforcing a strong partnership of equals, pragmatic, multilateral, focused on results in quality of people's lives and sustainable for our planet. And the global gateway is one of the tools that we have to move more resolutely from words to action. To talk about action, on 28 February, as I think you are aware, the European Investment Bank and the European Commission signed agreements worth of a total of 4 billion, 4,000 of millions in European numbers. And this is a warranty agreement that will enable up to 3.5 billion of loans and 500 millions in the form of a trust fund contribution to be mobilized to support business in Africa, Caribbean, and Pacific countries until 2027. And this agreement represents an important step in the process of implementing the EU Global Gateway Strategy and efforts to increase its development impact. What I think about that, I think that we have a lot of tools, different tools, we need to put these tools working, but there are different tools. In my perspective, the global Europe is more the program or the initiative that show the public wish, the public investment, European investment. The global gateway is a vision to to attract also private funds, to attract also private dynamics. And in the end, really, in the end, the goal is to help people. The goal is to help countries. The goal is to make a different kind of co-development. But it's also to be competitive in a global world. And it's also to be competitive as a multilateral partnership. Because when we link Africa, Latin America, North America, European Union, we can create, I believe a lot, in a multilateral world, a different, more fair, more equal, but a multilateral world. In the other solution or the other perspective to have two blocks to return to the Cold War and so on. But I think this is really the global gateway, is the way that the European Union are trying to put in work with other partners, first to help people, first create sustainable development, to try to achieve the SDGs, but also to be part of the design of the new order or the new disorder. But in the end, it must be tangible in the lives of all African citizens, respond effectively to their needs and aspirations, and enable real development of countries in key areas of the partnership between equals. And it must also have strong mechanisms to ensure policy coherence for development. And I heard some interventions during this morning that show that this is very important. It's kind of, for instance, we are working with our partners in Africa and other parts of the world, and saying we need to pass from this kind of agriculture, intensive agriculture, to more sustainable agriculture. But after, our markets are open to the products of the intensive models and are closed for the products of the sustainable action. So we need to be coherent in the policy, coherent in development, and also needs a governance structure that need to be transparent to make sure that the global gateway is implemented in alignment with local communities and with the partner countries' priorities. And the success of global gateway will serve the peoples of the two continents under consideration here today, and also the humanity. It's a very interesting debate. I was 15 days ago in Washington discussing all of that with the USA administration. You need that. I think that we need to maintain, under all the things that we are facing, the threats we are facing, we need to maintain a global dialogue, because this is a very crucial moment. And with this idea, our matrix is people, but to push what people need, we need to make a lot of choices, very important choices. And thank you for all the things I could learn, and also my assistant Joanna take notes and will tell me after about this very interesting discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're after 1 o'clock. I would like us to do two things. One is a round of applause to all of the speakers. And a huge thank you. And the other one is, I'm going to resist the temptation to sum up because it's not my job. But what I would like to say is that this has been a really lively conversation. I've really enjoyed it. I found it very interesting. I think there's more to explore. I think that's what we've discovered as well. And we should perhaps look to the opportunities to do those. So thank you so much. And thank you to our two MEPs for making this possible.
Thank you also, my colleague, for the co-production.
Thank you. Thank you all.